I'll talk for about 5 minutes and then we'll open up for questions. But, one of the things I was very happy to see, that we had a really good security checkpoint back there because, as you know, my opponent leaked out my Social Security number on a mail or so. If you see someone that looks like me, make sure that you check his driver's license and at least 3 forms of ID. And I want to thank my friendly neighborhood stalker from the Florida Democrat Party who is paid by taxpayer funds or whatever to follow me around. And this brings up a great point. I want you all to understand something. That right now, when you drive up US 1 through Pompano Beach, Florida, it's a desert. You see empty upon empty upon empty storefronts. And see, now is not the time for these sideshow antics and for these despicable acts. Because if people don't want to talk about the issues, if people don't want to talk about their principles and philosophies of governance, if people want to try to do one simple thing, and that is attack you and break you down, that means that they're not serving you. They're not doing the things that they should be doing to protect, as the Declaration of Independence says, your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. I have spent 22 years of active duty service in the United States Army. And even after retiring down here in 2004, I taught high school for a year up at Deerfield Beach, and then I returned back to Afghanistan for 2.5 years, where I was a civilian military advisor in Kandahar to the Afghan Army. I am seeking to run for Congress for one simple reason. You trusted me to go and protect and defend you when I wore a uniform. I am saying I will take off the boots and fatigues and will continue to go and protect that life, that liberty, and that pursuit of happiness. To honor the Constitution, to honor the oath that I took back on the 31st of July, 1982, that said I would support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same. We cannot continue to have the exact same thing going to Washington, D.C. A lot of people may be familiar with an experiment called Pavlov's experiment, and it's very Pavlovian now. If you continue to reward the bad behavior of the politicians in Washington, D.C., being a Republican or Democrat, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to continue to get the exact same bad behavior. And that is what's gotten us in the position where we are right now. If we don't understand that the means by which we grow long-term sustainable economic growth is not by public sector growth, all you have to do is go to Washington, D.C., and you will see cranes and new construction there. Well, there's new construction in Washington, D.C., there's not any new construction down here on Main Street on US 1. That's what we have to reverse. And we have to understand something very simple, that if we face these huge tax increases that could come to the American people next year, it is not about taxing the rich. It is really about punishing people that are employers and producers. But even more so, you're talking about an increase in capital gains tax. You're talking about an increase in dividends tax. You're talking about the marriage tax credit going away, the child tax credit being cut in half, the death tax coming back. How does that affect what you could pass on to subsequent generations in America? You're talking about the alternative minimum tax population going from 4 million to 28 million. That will kill the economic engine that we call the United States of America. And I'm glad to see the mayor here because that will kill his city. Because if you continue to have a large financial burden, a tax burden that comes to you from the federal government, comes to you by way of property taxes from the state government, and then as well from the county, and even so at the local millage rates. What happens in January 2011 if the American people wake up and all of a sudden they find their marginal tax rate is anywhere from 70 to 75%? Well, I can tell you what happens. Production is stagnating in this country. You can study that historically. When Coolidge and Harding took the marginal tax rates down to 24%, but then subsequent to them, Hoover and Roosevelt rose it up to 84%. Henry Morgenthau, Roosevelt's Secretary of the Treasury, said, we have tried everything we can with government level spending, Keynesian economic theory, and we were not able to bring ourselves out. And he said, if it had not been for that World War II my dad served in, we probably would have stayed in that depression. That's the exact same thing we're seeing right now. In the 1990s, when Japan faced the economic situation that they faced, they tried stimulus package upon stimulus package upon stimulus package, 9 stimulus packages. And that kept them in the economic morass in which they found themselves. Right now, all you have to do and read and understand that the public sector is outpacing the private sector in compensation 2 to 1. Public sector is growing, up 8%. They're estimating in 5 to 6 years that our debt will overtake our GDP. And what happens to this country when what you owe overtakes what you produce? It's just a matter of time when the United States of America resembles California. or even worse, the United States of America resembles Greece, where a person can retire at 55 years of age and expect the government to pay them an 80% pension. See, if we're not careful in the United States of America, when we continue to have people up in Washington, D.C. that are nationalizing more production, being in the finance industry, the automobile industry, healthcare industry, education, if cap and trade goes through, that's the energy sector, and it will also affect our small business growth. If we're not careful and we continue to grow and expand a welfare state, Wall Street Journal last week talked about how the poverty level has expanded in the United States of America and how more people are tied to government. If we end up having a country, and in March of this year, the statistic came out that said 47% of Americans do not pay federal income taxes, but yet they vote. And history will tell you, when in a republic, when in a representative democracy like what we have, when it gets to the point where the people can vote their own free entitlements, eventually that country will collapse. And that's where we are. Free healthcare, free education, free car, free cell phone, free whatever you want, all on the backs of the other 53%. But what happens if all of a sudden it goes 50-50? Half of America paying for the other half of America. What happens when you wake up and your earnings are not going for your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness? That's the critical point where we are with our economy, with our unemployment situation. See, right now, the goal is to have more Americans wedded to government either by subsistence check or by employment check. And if that happens, what happens to you down here in your life? What happens to our seniors? Because those politicians that took Social Security and took it out of an independent trust fund account, put it in a general operating account, and they used it for all their pork barrel spending and all their wasteful spending. So now Social Security is nothing but empty IOUs. And when you continue to put Americans out of work, guess what? Those are not people that are in there paying the payroll taxes so that we can replenish Social Security. We've got to build back our employment. Friday, the statistics came out for South Florida. 12.3% unemployment in Palm Beach County. 10.7% unemployment in Broward County. 14.4% unemployment in Miami-Dade County. The state of Florida is at 11.7% unemployment. South Florida is what's dragging down the state of Florida for foreclosures. Florida is the number 3 in the nation for foreclosures. If we do not get people in Washington, D.C. to control this out of control spending out of Washington, D.C., that understand that the failure of the Bush administration was if you're going to have tax cuts, you can't grow government at the same time. And a bad situation was taken over by the current president, but the current president has quadrupled that problem. It is time for each and every one of you to understand that this election cycle, these midterm elections, are the critical cycle which will determine the future and the legacy for the United States of America for 30, 40, maybe 50 years. If we get it wrong now, what do you say to your children and grandchildren? Because my grandparents and my parents are the reason why I can stand here today. Having been born in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, not a great background, the same neighborhood Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was brought up in. And I was taught a very simple thing, that in America, you can achieve whatever greatness you want as long as you have it in your heart. And as long as you understand that it really is about the content of your character, it's not about the color of your skin. I've been so fortunate for the blessings and the opportunities that this country has afforded me. But right now, when I have 2 daughters, 17 and 13, I'm concerned about what I will leave to them as a legacy. So I tell you this, the history books will say that this year we took a stand. The history books will say that we recommitted to the principles and values of our founding fathers, being the Declaration of Independence, being the Constitution, being the Federalist Papers, the things that made America the most exceptional, most great nation that the world has ever known in 234 years. And if we get sidetracked by the antics and the crap, then we will lose our country. You must hold people's feet to the fire if they're going to seek to go and represent you. And let's end this Pavlovian experiment of rewarding bad behavior that goes to Washington, D.C. So thank you very much for having me here, and I'm open for your questions. Thank you.